come out, wherever you are.
Hey, and welcome to a new tutorial for AIanimation.com. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through the full workflow of turning a AI-generated 2D image into a 3D model, and then rigging it using an AI process, and then animating it using AI before comping it together in Adobe After Effects with an AI-generated background scene using Runway ML, plus various digital motion graphics techniques and some compositing to bring it all together and create the final image that you can see there. There's some paid tools, some free tools, and hopefully you'll learn a few things along the way. Love to know what you think in the comments, and it's exciting to think where this software is going to go and how we can use more traditional digital animation techniques combined with AI tools to create new creatives, tell new stories, and create compelling visuals. All right, on with the video. First of all, we want to create our 2D character image, and I'm going to be doing that using Midjourney. So initially, we're going to be here in Discord chatting with the Midjourney bot. And first of all, I want to upload my own image that we can use as a reference to help with the positioning of our character, which is a character in a T-pose. And I'm just going to upload that by dragging it over, letting go and pressing enter. Then we press / and press enter, and it uses the Imagine prompt. And then we paste out our text prompt. And I'm going for sad dystopian android robot, full body shot, arms stretched out to side, facing directly at camera, against a white background, red eye, hydraulics, brown rusty metal body, hyperrealism, cinematic, AR 16:9, and this bit of code tells Midjourney we want a 16:9 image, and if we do --IW, which stands for image weight, we can then write out an image weight up to the value of 2 for how much we want this image to impact the output. So I'm just going to do a nice low value of 0.2, as we don't want it to actually reflect much of the look of this image, just the composition and the position of the character, and press enter. If you're familiar with image generation using AI, you'll understand that you might need to run that prompt a few times, try different variables until you arrive at something you're happy with. So after a few goes, I arrived at this image, and you'll see that none of them are in a T-pose, but the images are pretty cool, and I really like this one here. So I actually upscaled this one and then zoomed out. I was really happy with this output here, so I decided to use this as the basis for my 3D model. I also used Midjourney to create our jungle image, which we're going to bring to life later on in the tutorial. Then using Photoshop, I quickly removed the shadow on the floor and cropped the image so we just have that single image of our robot. We're then going to use a new AI tool which allows you to turn a 2D image into a 3D model, and it's made by Common Sense Machines. And if you go to 3d.csm.ai, you can check out other people's work, and you see it does a pretty decent job of turning a 2D image into a 3D model. Whilst the colours do change once it's turned into a 3D model, the results are still very impressive. And it's the first thing I've seen delivering results of this quality. So we're going to go ahead and log in. And then once logged in, you can press the Image to 3D button. And I'm going to drag in my robot image. You can then click on the image, scroll down, and it gives you a preview of how it thinks the 3D model will turn out. And this is just a quick preview and doesn't exactly match what you might get, but it gives you a very good approximation. And if the results aren't perfect, you could try tweaking the image or uploading the image again, because each time it does vary slightly. Supposedly, the experimental model can produce higher resolution models and just better results, but if you're not getting the result you're after, you can turn it off. I'm going to leave it on for this one and press generate. Now, the training and the creation of the 3D mesh can take quite a few hours. Whilst you wait for that, please make sure you press subscribe on this video and head over to AIanimation.com to see what we've got going on there. It's a new site for creatives who are using AI. You can register for free, create a profile, and hopefully in the future, win work, showcase your videos, and things like that. We've also got an exciting new Discord server just for AI animation, so head over there and chat to some like-minded souls, share any AI tests you're working on, any videos, say hello, talk about the future of animation, and yeah, let me know what you'd like to see on the Discord channel and any changes you'd like to see over at AIanimation.com. I'll include a link in the video description below, or you can press the About button or press the little button over here on the YouTube channel. All right, and back to the video. Okay, a few hours later, and CSM has finished processing my image and turned it into this 3D model, and it's done a pretty decent job. Yes, there's some loss of quality, and it's done some interesting things to the face of our robot, but overall I'm really quite impressed, especially considering all I had to do was upload an image and press go, and I'm sure the AI technology behind this is going to improve and improve further with time. You can then press download mesh and choose the GLB file to save it to your computer. If you wanted to, you could position your character in a T-pose using Photoshop and then upload it to CSM to create the model in this T-pose, but I'm going to do it manually in Blender, which is a very popular free open source 3D animation and modeling package. And go ahead and press File, Import, and we want a GLB file. Choose our mesh that we downloaded and press Import. We can then click on View and press Frame Selected, and we have our model. If you turn the render mode to viewport shading, you can see the texture in place. Now, before we adapt our mesh into that T-pose, I want to save the project and then save out the material applied to our character separately so we can edit it in the future. So first of all, we're just going to quickly save. With that save, we can go up to the menu here, drop down the hierarchy to get to our material, double click. If we drop down the surface toggle here, open base color, and then press the button here to the right of the texture file, we can choose the bottom option of write file to original location. You press that, and then it saved that material out as a PNG, which we can then adapt in the future if we want to, or upscale it, tweak the colors and things like that. And now I'm going to quickly adapt the mesh so we have our character in the T-pose, which is needed for the next step where we're going to rig the character using AI. Change to the modeling mode, again press View, Frame Selected, and then make sure that the X-ray mode is turned on up here so that when we select vertices, it selects those on both the ones we can see and those on the back of the model. And then using our selection tool, we're going to draw around all the vertices that we want to move. So I'm just going to select his arm, holding down Shift just to catch a few more there, and then choose the rotation tool and rotate our arm. Use the position tool to reposition it, and then repeat the process for the other arm. And there we go. It's a bit crude and you could spend time tidying up the mesh, but for this tutorial, I'm not particularly worried. But we're happy with this now, and we're going to press File, Export, FBX, change our path mode to Copy, just in case it needs to copy the texture files to the same path, and everything else we can leave as is. Press Export. We're then going to go to Mixamo.com, which is actually provided by Adobe. So if you are a member of the Adobe Creative Suite, you can log in and make use of their service. Essentially, it's a big catalog of pre-made 3D characters that you can use. And there's also pre-made animations, which are very cool, but we're not actually going to use these in today's tutorial. What we're after is the fact that it can automatically rig our character. So we're going to press Upload Character, choose our FBX file, and then press Next. And then we're going to quickly align a few points just to give it a helpful reference so it can build the character rig. So we align the different points: chin, wrists, elbows, knees, and the groin. And then press Next, wait for it to evaluate the model, and then press Next. And there we have our rigged 3D robot, and we can pick from any of their pre-made motion capture data to grab bits of animation, and you can download it fully animated. But for today's tutorial, we're not actually going to use that. I'm just going to search for the T-pose and press Download. We want an FBX with the skin and press Download again. And that's us finished with Mixamo. You could open up that downloaded file in Blender just to check out the rig and see what it's done, but we're going to jump straight into the next step, which involves going to Deepmotion.com, where we're going to be creating the animation for our rig. Just for reference, other alternatives that I've tried out, there's kinetics.tech. It does allow you to create animation based on some video and allows you to download an FBX file that you could then work out how to apply to your character rig. And I think in the future, there are going to be ways to upload characters to kinetics.tech. The results I got were a bit hit and miss, but I'm sure it's got potential. I also tried out motion.plask.ai, and again, I think the results can be really good here. You just need to do some better naming of the armature, the bones within your character. But again, it's got potential and it's currently free to try as well. But we're going to go with Deepmotion as I got the best results and didn't have any feet sliding around or anything like that. I'm currently using the free trial, but we'll soon be paying for the service as it's going to help with an animated short I'm working on. But once logged in, press Animate 3D, press View Characters, press Upload, and then we're going to upload our FBX file that we downloaded from Mixamo, which is here. Deepmotion doesn't like having any spaces within the file name, so I'm going to quickly rename this. Open File, press Upload, press OK, and there we have our dodgy looking 3D model ready to work with. Let's press Create Animation. So I have this clip here that I filmed just on my phone, walking around at my desk at home. Look at that. God, he's shocked. What an amazing actor. That boy's going to go far. Okay, so I'm going to just drag that video file into this box here, get rid of that dash and press rename, and then give it a few seconds as it analyzes the footage. Okay, and it's finished processing that, and I don't need to trim or crop the footage. I'm happy with how it does its foot locking. We could change the fallback pose to a T pose if we want to. We can enable head rotation tracking, and then we're going to press create. It gives you a quick summary of the options you've chosen and how many credits it's going to use, and we can press start job. Okay, and a minute or two later, Deepmotion's completed that process, and you can press OK, and you can pan around the scene and see your character being animated, copying the general motion from that video footage. Press download, and we want the FBX file, so press download again. We can then close Deepmotion. We're then jumping back into Blender with a blank scene, and we can highlight the assets here and delete those, and then go File, Import, FBX, and we can open the FBX file from Deepmotion, and we don't need that T-pose included. Making sure animation is ticked on and press Import. Again, press View, Frame Selected, and you can move through the timeline and have your animated robot. If when you go to Viewport Shading, the texture is not included, you can reattach that by going to File, External Data, Find Missing Files, open the folder where you saved the material texture from the initial CSM model, and press Find Missing Files. Now, before we export this animation as an OBJ sequence to take it into Adobe After Effects, where we can composite it and add other effects and create that other background and environment, I want to add a tracking point onto the head of our character, just on the tip of the nose, that we can then track and add our lens flare to later. So depending on the character that you've created and you're working with, you might not need to do this step. But I'm going to go ahead and press Add, Empty, Plane Axis, use the Move tool to position it. And then with this file selected, and it's called Empty, we're going to go down to the Constraints menu, press here, press Add Constraint, and say Child Of. And then using the eyedropper tab here, we're going to click that and choose one of the bones here, so the armature, or you could choose it from up here. This extra bone menu appears, and we click here and choose Head. And that point jumps way out of our scene, so if we tick Set Inverse, and it moves back to the original position, and now when we play through the animation, that tracking point stays with our character. I'm also going to click this empty axis, right-click, and say Duplicate Linked, and just drop it further out into the scene, and just position it in the direction that the robot's looking. And again, as we play through the scene, that point will move, giving us a line of sight for the character, which again will help with our lighting later on. We can then select both of those points and press File, Export, Adobe After Effects. And if you're not seeing this menu in Blender, it's because you've not got the plugin installed, and I'll quickly go through that in a second. Press there and just save out the file. So very quickly, if you can't see this Adobe After Effects JSX file export, go to your Edit, Preferences, search After Effects here, and if it's here, you can just turn it on. If it's not, you will need to download a script, and I'll include a link in the video description below where you can go download a file and then press Install, link to the file you've downloaded, and then turn it on. I did cover this in a previous video, so I'll include a link to that as well. Okay, one last step before we leave Blender is to go up to File, Export, Wavefront OBJ, not Wavefront OBJ Legacy, we want the new version, and we're going to save out an OBJ sequence of our animation. Go down and make sure that Animation Export is turned on, create a folder, and press Export. Now, depending on the complexity of your mesh and how fast your computer is, this process can take a couple of minutes to process, and if you have a very complex scene, the files created can be quite large. Whereas here, it took about 5 to 10 seconds. You can then save and close Blender. Now we get to have some fun in Adobe After Effects, where we're going to start compositing our scene together before we create a background environment. So with a brand new project open, we're going to press Composition, New Composition, and we're going to make a 4K composition. So 3840 by 2160, 30 frames per second. Give that a name, Master Comp, and then right click, create a solid, and we're going to call this solid Element 3D. We're going to be using Element 3D, which is a plugin made by Video Copilot for bringing 3D objects into After Effects rather than rendering in a 3D package, and you currently buy it for $199. If, however, you don't have access to the Element 3D plugin and you don't have the money to purchase it, you can check out the current beta version of Adobe After Effects, which supposedly supports 3D file formats which you could save out of Blender. I tried it myself and it wasn't working, but I think they have updated it since, so it might be worth looking into. As far as I understand, it doesn't work with shadows or motion blur, but it's no doubt going to improve over the coming months. You can also investigate Cineware with After Effects using the Cinema 4D Lite version that comes with your Adobe Creative Suite subscription. But because I do have Element 3D and there's lots of reasons why I like it, I'm going to go ahead and use that. So we're going to right click on our Element 3D layer, press Effect, Video Copilot, Element. And that adds this effect to our effects panel, and we can then press Scene Setup and it opens up the Element 3D UI. And from here we're going to go File, Import 3D Sequence. And then choose the first frame of our OBJ sequence that we exported from Blender, press Import 3D Object, change the alignment for the model to the bottom, and press OK. With our object selected up here, we can go down to the transform properties and turn on normalize size. Press the button here and it will zoom out just to frame them nicely in our preview window. And you can rotate round. You can play around with the start frame here to cycle through the animation, but reset it back to 1 once done. We can drop down here, go to the material, play around with specular. You can up the overall reflectiveness of our character. And if you have them, you could apply a specular map or a normal map to add extra detail to the character materials. Over in the presets menu, if you click on environments, you can choose different environments which are being reflected in the scene and they impact how the character is lit. But we can also customize that later on as well as use light in our After Effects scene. Again, with our model selected, if we scroll down, you can change the surface options normal setting from model. If you change it to auto normals, it actually smooths out the mesh slightly compared to what comes in directly from Blender. And again, you could play with more and more settings here, but that's one for another tutorial. Before we close the Element 3D UI, I want to add a plane on the floor just to receive shadows. So I'm going to press Create, choose the plane model selected. I'm going to up the X and the Y scale, and then go over to Materials, Physical, and there's a preset there called Match Shadow, and we can just drag that onto the plane and it will turn invisible, but once there's a light in the scene casting shadows, it will pick those up. Press OK, and we have our 3D model in our Adobe After Effects composition, and you can play through the timeline to see it animated. We can add a camera, and then pressing C, we can cycle through the different camera controls, zoom in, rotate around our model, position the camera somewhere where we're happy. We can then right click, press New, choose Light, and create a new spotlight, a parallel light, or a point light. Make sure Cast Shadows is turned on, and you can set the shadow darkness, diffusion, cone angle, and things like that. Press OK. And then in your scene, you can use your gizmo to position your light where you'd like it. At the end, there's a target point that you can drag down. You can click here and change to 2 views or 4 views. So you can have a top-down view here, just so you can check that it's pointing towards your character. And then within the Element 3D layer, if you click on that, go to the Effects panel, drop down Render Settings, drop down Shadows. You can enable shadows within Element 3D. So shadow mapping is on by default, and it's generally quite processor friendly. And the results can be fine depending on the use case, but they're not as accurate as ray tracing. So with the Element 3D selected, you can change shadow mapping to ray traced. So you can jump between shadow mapping and ray traced and see what works best for you. But now we have our character walking around with a shadow being cast, and it's already looking pretty cool. Next, I want to bring in the tracking data for the end of the nose, where we're going to be adding our light. And we exported that tracking data from Blender using the After Effects script. So we're going to quickly run that script that it's generated. So we press File, Scripts, Run Script File, then open that JSX file that was generated from Blender and press Open, press OK, and that will create a new composition in After Effects. We can double click on that. This composition is actually HD rather than 4K, so we quickly need to upscale this to match our master comp. We can do that by going File, Scripts, Scale Composition, and then in this pop-up, set a new composition width to 3840 and press Scale. And the Scale Composition script is just built into After Effects. Once that's finished, we can close that. We can then grab these 2 tracking points, jump back into our master comp, paste them in here. And as you play through, you'll see they're moving around, but they're not aligned with the nose of our character, and that's because Element 3D has been scaled up. So we can create a new null, make sure that's 3D, grab our 2 tracking points, parent those to that null, and then press S to open up the scale value, and then we can increase that. And hopefully you can see on YouTube, we can see our 2 tracking points here. And as we scale up, we can see they're moving, and looks like 300 on the dot is the right scale. And then as we move through, we have those 2 tracking points that align with the front of our character's head and the direction that they're looking. I'm quickly going to name these so we know which one's which. Nose, nose target. So nose is the one on the face. We're then going to add a light to the front of our robot. So we're going to right click and go new light. Call this one headlight. It can be red. Press OK. Before we do the next step, I'm just going to delete that null that we used to scale up our tracking points and get rid of that. And then on our nose and nose target, just going to press P to bring up their position values. And then on the headlight, drop down, transform properties, and we're going to pick whip and link the point of interest to the nose target position and the position value to the nose position. And we now have our light here, which is moving around with the head of our robot. Press this button here to get rid of that transparent background, and then going to add an optical flare effect to create that visible light glow coming from our head torch. So I'm going to right click, create new, go solid, call this one optical flare. And if you've seen my other videos, I'm going to use the Video Copilot plugin optical flares, which is great for creating volumetric lighting like this. It is a paid plugin, but it's well worth it. I'm going to right click, go Video Copilot, optical flares, change the render mode to on transparent. For the source type, we're going to change from 2D to tracked lights. And within the light settings, we're going to choose lights that begin with the letter H. So that's only going to choose our headlight rather than this scene light that was casting the initial shadow. Then as we move through our scene, we have this working really well, but the center point for our optical flare is being set by this point, and we want to link that to that other tracking point. So we can spin down, making sure we've got our position value visible for the nose target. Scale this up a bit. We can then pick whip the center position for our optical flare and link that to our nose target position. Now when we play through our scene, the lens flare is moving with the head turn of our robot, but it's quite hard to see, and the lens flare isn't the exact sort we're after, so you can press options in the optical flares plugin, and you can create your own optical flare, or you can look at the presets. For example, this one here is quite nice. Press OK and see how that turns out. Go up here into the settings and reduce the brightness, play around with the scale. You could press options again and spin through the settings for your optical flare and reduce the size of things or turn certain things off. Like that. So we get a much smaller glow at the source. We can then increase the brightness. You can see how as you rotate the camera, the optical flare moves with it. And we can turn the background transparency on again just to see that the shadows are still there and working well. We could quickly create a new solid, create a white layer, move that to the bottom. And if you wanted to, you could then increase, and we could go in and play around with the size of the plane within Element 3D. And that stops that clipping on the edge of the plane. Next up, we want to create a cool 3D environment, and we're going to do that using Runway ML. And then we're going to track the footage and drop our robot into that scene, and also use the same scene to help generate some environment mapping that's going to impact how our character looks. So I'm going to use Runway ML to create this animated background from that static image of the jungle scene we created way back in Midjourney. So here we are on Runway ML, and we're going to choose image to video, and we're going to upload a file. Press open, and then simply press generate. Runway ML took about 1 minute to process that clip, and as I press play, we've got this 4-second video clip, animation clip moving forward through the jungle. So I've gone ahead and downloaded that file. I'm now going to jump into a new favorite piece of AI software called Topaz AI, and I will include a link to this in the description below, which might well be an affiliate link, but it is really very cool and superb for upscaling and improving the quality or the length of footage exported from things like Runway ML or Kyber. So if you go ahead, once software's opened, press browse, add our footage, which is currently 4 seconds long. And as I skim through the footage, whilst it's really very impressive what Runway ML can do, the footage is very flickery, quite grainy, and there's quite a lot of noise in the image. So I'm going to go ahead and in the settings up here, we're going to change it to become a 4K clip, and it's going to scale up the whole thing, and using AI to make sure that's done really well. And then for stabilization, I'm going to turn that on, tick reduce jittery motions, up that to 3 passes. And then for frame interpolation, we want to do a little bit of slow motion, so we're going to make it 2 times slow-mo, so it'll become an 8-second clip. We can replace duplicate frames as they are. And then for enhancement, I'm going to change the AI model from fine-tune enhance to details and fidelity, and press export. Now this is the completed clip from Topaz AI, and it's been upscaled to a 4K clip and slowed down, so it's now 8 seconds long. and it's done a really nice job. Whilst there's still some grain and noise to the image, it's very much improved on what we had before. And this took around 2 to 3 minutes to process, more because of the slow-mo than anything else. Otherwise, it can do it in around 30 seconds if it's just upscaling. I've now jumped back to runwayml.com, and this time we're going to get a depth pass from that background image. So if you go down to View All Tools, scroll down, there's one called Extract Depth. Upload our new video file. So here we have the download from Runway ML, and it's produced a very nice depth map, and it looks pretty good. If it is a bit too flickery, you can run it back through Topaz AI with that reduce flicker processing applied to create a smoother depth map. Now I've brought our environment scene and that depth map into Adobe After Effects and dropped them onto our composition. And the first step is to camera track our footage. So with the footage of the environment selected, we're going to go up to Window, make sure the tracker menu is enabled here, and then down here, press Track Camera. Now you can leave this tracking in the background and carry on working on something else, or go and get yourself a nice cup of tea. Okay, and then after a minute or so, the tracking is completed, and with that footage selected and the 3D camera tracker affected, you should be able to see lots of points scattered over your scene. If you can't see them, you can play around with the scaling of the points here using the track point size. And then choosing a location where you'd like to place your robot, I'm going to right click and choose Create Null and Camera, which creates a null and a camera. And that camera should be matching the movement through the jungle. If we change to 2-view point of view and zoom out, you can see our camera there moving along the line through the jungle. And we have our null that we've created, and that should be moving in place in the jungle. And then if we go to our Element 3D layer, and our character is assigned to Group 1. So just to check that, within the Element 3D UI, you can make different group folders and assign them to different groups. So our plane and our robot is in Group 1. So back in the effects, in Group 1, down the bottom in Group Utilities, you can choose Create Group Null, press Create, and that will create a null, and that is at the base of our robot, which we can't see right now. We need to grab hold of our footage and our depth pass and move those down to below the Element 3D layer. We turn off the 3D track camera momentarily. We can click on that group null we just created and see that it is at the base of our robot. We can delete our previous camera where we positioned the shadow on the floor of the robot. We don't need that camera anymore. We enable that 3D tracker camera, and we're going to move the position of our group null, which is linked to that robot, to the position of this tracked null to move the robot here. But before we do that, we want to link the nose target, the nose, and that spotlight that was casting the shadow on the floor, and we're going to parent those to our group null for our robot. So then when we move the robot, those tracking points and that spotlight will move with it. We can then copy the position value from that tracked null on the floor, paste it onto the robot's group null, press S, and we can then up the scale until we see our robot. And the scale's just different because of the camera tracking and how it's worked out the scale of the scene. And there we go, we have our robot in the space, shadow being cast on the floor. We can click on that group null and use the arrow tools to move it to the side. You could play around with the diffusion of the shadow, move that spotlight around to affect where the shadow is falling on the floor. We can also, within Element 3D, go down to Custom Layers, Custom Texture Map, Layer 1, and we can choose our footage. And then within the Element 3D UI, we can press Environment up here, drop down here and choose Custom Layer 1. And it will then use this image, our footage, as the environment map. So whilst it's not a true HDRI for the scene, which you could create, it does create similar lighting and it helps the character fit better within the environment footage. Press OK, just looks a little bit cooler. You will notice the headlight has disappeared, and we can fix that by now having these tracking points scaled up with the new position and scale of our robot. We can unlink those, unparent those, and now the light is back following that position. And again, because our scene's scaled up so much, we click on the optical flares effect and increase the brightness or scale to get our optical flare back in view. So now when we move through the scene, we have our robot walking in the scene, tracked to that AI-generated environment from Runway ML with a shadow cast on the floor and that optical flare moving in the scene as well. Okay, and we could finish the tutorial there. I just want to do a couple more things to make the scene feel a little bit more cinematic and play around with the lighting and things like that. So first of all, I want to add a camera blur using that depth pass we created that we can control and shift the focus. So we're going to right click, go new, create adjustment layer, call this blur, right click, go effects, blur, camera lens blur, and for the blur map layer, we're going to go down and choose our depth map. We can up the blur radius quite high, and then we can keyframe the blur focal distance. So it's currently on 0. And as we shift that up, we can change where the focus point is. So I'm just going to set a keyframe on this layer, press U to open up the keyframes that I've applied. So that's with the robot in focus. So I want to start out of focus, shifting that one along a bit. So to start off with, set the blur focal distance to 133, and then as the scene plays out, focus shifts, and our robot comes into focus. And the foliage more in the foreground is then out of focus. Next, if we wanted to, we could play around with the color of our optical flares. At the moment, it's taking that red hue from the light color, but within the optical flare effects, you could turn off use light color, and then it's going to make use of the preset colors we have in here. And again, if you wanted to, you can change the color there as well. You can also turn on motion blur for your Element 3D layer. So if there's any quick motion on your 3D character, it will be blurred to match the speed, giving it a more cinematic, realistic feel. And lastly, just a little bit of color correction. I'm going to apply an adjustment layer, call it color, and right click. And you could play around with hue, saturation, levels, and curves. But for speed, I'm just going to use Lumetri, which is the same coloring suite built into Adobe Premiere. We can drop down creative and spin through some of these different options here and see how they impact the footage. And you can reduce the intensity of those and play around with those until you get something you like. And just finally, within Element 3D, if you look into the render settings, you can play around with the physical environment. You can up the gamma, which will increase some of the brightness in the way that the environment is reflected in the material. But there we go. That brings us to the end of the tutorial. We could take it even further, add another plane on the floor with some reflection to sort of mirror what we're seeing on the floor here, add more lights, perfect where the shadow's coming from, play around with color correction, things like that. Cut to different shots, have close-ups, try and tell a story using these different techniques where we've created an AI image using Midjourney, turned it into a 3D model using CSM, rigged it via Blender, going up to Mixamo, then animated in Deepmotion before sending out as an OBJ sequence to open up in Element 3D and composite it in After Effects with that AI-generated background using a Midjourney image and Runway ML, which has been upscaled and the quality improved using Topaz AI. That's it. Thanks very much for watching. If you do enjoy videos like this and you're interested in what's coming in the world of AI animation, how you can use it along with other traditional digital animation techniques, please press subscribe. And yes, please check out aianimation.com and come and say hello in the Discord. All right. Thanks very much. Have an awesome day. Cheers.